We're going to talk here on page 50 about function notation. Function notation. Okay, now first let's talk about this word notation. We talked about functions a little bit yesterday. Notation is the way that something is written. So for example, when I write the time, when I say, oh, it's 2:30, when I say it's 30 minutes past 2 o'clock, how do I write that? I write it as a 2, and then I write it as 2 dots like this, it's called a colon, and a 30, right? That's just how it's written. I could have, maybe someone a long time ago decided, oh, we're going to write it like this, right? Maybe they could have decided, oh, we're going to write it like this with a dash, but they didn't. They decided to write it this way. So now that is the notation. That is how we write time, right? So notation is just how something is written. So here is what function notation looks like. Okay, and this is, again, this is how it's written. And it's a little confusing because there's parentheses involved, and the parentheses don't mean multiplication. Okay, so here's like kind of a ridiculous example. Here we have a toaster, right? And then in parentheses, I'm going to put bagel. Okay, and this equals a toasted bagel. Okay, so why is this written like this? So the way that this works is we put the machine, right? Like the toaster is the machine. This is the input, goes inside parentheses right next to the name of the machine, right? So there's toaster, there's no space here. We put in parentheses, we input the bagel, and then the output is over here. Okay, now this looks crazy because you're like, well, is this toaster times bagel? No, it's not. It's just like a ridiculous way that we decided we're going to write functions. And so in math, they look like this. They look like, this is what functions are going to look like. Right, and here's the thing, x is the input. Okay, remember we talked about x is always the input. The name of the function, the machine, is f, right? And a lot of times we call it f, sometimes we call it a different letter like g or h, but this is just how it's written. And then this, right here, this is the output. So for example, here if I input a 2, then I would take that 2 and I would multiply by 5 and add 7, right? That's just, this is just how it's written. Okay, so for example, if I have a toaster and I input bread, what comes out? So the machine is the toaster. I input bread. What comes out is toast. Okay, here's another example. If there's a person, that's the machine, and I input food, what comes out? It's poop. Okay, poop comes out, right? Input, output. Now, let's get into math. Those are two kind of silly examples. What if the machine, there's a machine, and what it does is it takes numbers and it squares them. So if I take that machine and I input 5, what comes out? So the machine squares a number, so I take the machine and I input a 5 into it. So I put in 5, and it takes that number and it squares it. So what does that mean? It means it says, oh, it's 5 times 5. So that would be 25. Okay. What if I have a machine that subtracts 10, and I input a 27? What would that get me? Okay, I'm going to write a couple examples, and then you should pause and try it. What if I have a machine that it takes a number and it adds 3, then multiplies by 2? So this machine takes whatever you put in and adds 3 and multiplies by 2. What would happen if I input a 7? What if I had this machine and then in the input I put a 5? What would happen then? If this is my machine, it takes x and it multiplies it by 2 and adds 1, and then I input a 5. Okay? Pause the video and try those. So if a machine subtracts 10 from 27, it would be 27, subtract 10, you've gotten 17 here. Okay, if a machine adds 3, then multiplies by 2, so like if I input a 7, right, and then I add 3 to it, that would be 10, and then multiply by 2, that would be 20. Now this machine, it says, okay, if if I have f of x equals 2x plus 1, what if I put in a 5 instead of the x? So that would look like this, right? And then that becomes 2 times 5, which is 10, plus 1, that would be 11.